Hi there. I'm Scott Breslin of the Plant Network. I have a real treat for you today. I'd like to invite you to listen in on a discussion with three Swedish Christian leaders. Now, these guys have been working for decades to see vibrant communities of Jesus followers birthed in Sweden. So please join us as they share their perspective on what God is up to these days in Sweden.
So thank you, gentlemen, for joining this conversation today, where we're going to talk about what God's maybe doing in Sweden. And so Jonas, Rickard, and Isak, I'd just like to welcome you. And maybe you could just introduce yourself. Jonas, could you start?
Jonas Melin, I live in Jönköping, and I work with church planting in the Swedish Alliance Mission. So I'm coaching church planters and coordinating our work nationally.
Thank you. Rickard.
Yes, I'm Rickard Hultmar, and I am a senior pastor of Korskyrkan in downtown Stockholm. So I'm in the center of our capital city. And I have been working with church planting things for many years, and now from this church we're networking with other churches and organizations to plant more churches in the Stockholm area.
Thank you. Isak.
Yeah, Isak from Gothenburg, live in Jönköping, in a multicultural neighborhood. Work with OM as the associate field leader for the Sweden team. Grew up in a church plant in a multicultural neighborhood and is a part of one now, same as Jonas. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Now, many of our audience don't have that much information about Sweden. We know that there's a population of over 10 million people. What is the situation of the church in Sweden?
Jonas, why don't you start, please?
A long Christian history. Became a Lutheran country in the 16th century, and got a Lutheran state church, and Christian influence has been very strong. But today we are one of the most secularized countries in the world, and the Christian influence in politics and in society is very, very low right now. And so we have had a long process of secularization during the 20th century.
So yeah, I can just add to that. So even if still numbers and statistics say that many people are Christians or consider themselves as Christians, the idea that the main idea here is that faith is a very private thing that you should keep to yourself. So there's very little conversation around faith in your everyday life. And it also means that even if you are a believer, you're sort of required to live in a way that your faith shouldn't affect your everyday life or your decision making, and which means that secular values have become very, very strong. So even if you believe, even if many people are believers, they don't live out their faith as disciples, I would say.
And over the last several decades, immigration has increased from almost nothing, mid 1900s, to slowly increasing, and then of course with the different wars and disasters around the world over the last few decades have increased influx of different nationalities, ethnic Christians and ethnic Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs, etc. And people have come who are Jesus followers and who kind of established their churches, like you mentioned, Rickard, when we talked here a bit before. So there's something happening within some of these immigrant communities, and also Muslims coming to faith from different backgrounds, actually unprecedented, from Somalis being one group of people who God is going after now, tugging at them with his love and the gospel of Jesus Christ.
I remember.
Really, can I guess add to that? I really think it's interesting because Sweden has received more immigrants than many other countries in Europe. So right now we're about 20% of our population are born in another country and have moved here. And then you have second generation immigrants on top of that, which means that probably 1/3 of our population are not national Swedes from generations back. And it's interesting to see that it seems to be in those groups of people that God is moving the most right now. You mentioned Somalis, but also Afghans and Iranians.
Yeah.
And also these immigrant churches reaching out to their own. So many people also come back to Christ in those churches right now.
Ricard, when I first came to my first visit to Sweden was in 1983, I believe, and I was here for 2 weeks courting the woman who would later become my wife. And in those 2 weeks, my biggest impression with Sweden was how monolithic it was. In other words, I didn't see one person of color in my whole 2 weeks of being in Gothenburg, the second largest city, and Stockholm. And my impression was just that everybody is blonde. And when Swedes were talking about a foreigner, it was talking about someone from Finland. And how that has all changed in the last 40 years to what you said, 20% are foreign born. That's an amazing social transformation.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, Jonas, to talk about secularism and the power of secularism and what that means and how it started, how it got influenced in Sweden.
The resistance to Christian faith among ethnic Swedes is very strong. And I think partly that depends on our history, that we had a very strong state church. The church and the king supported each other to oppress the people. And we had a very strong oppression from the church and from the government against free churches or free movements. Or there were, of course, always also evangelical movements within the Lutheran Church, but from the top, it was very much oppressing people. So Swedes very much connect Christianity with oppression and rules and laws and punishment. And I think that's one of the reasons that the secularization has been so strong in Sweden, because we want to get rid of the powerful church that oppresses our lives. And I think you need, when you want to reach ethnic Swedes, which I think really is a difficult group to reach with the gospel, you need to consider this, that this is the baggage that we have to wrestle with.
So what's it like in Stockholm in regard to like who goes to church and what is the influence of people of followers of Jesus in Stockholm?
Well, we have, the population of the Stockholm area is about 2 million people, and I have some numbers here. We're about 250 evangelical churches outside the Lutheran Swedish Church, and about 42,500 free church members. And a pretty big number of those churches are also immigrant churches, which means that the Swedish population is not really very much touched. So we've seen a big growth in numbers of neo-Pentecostal immigrant churches over the last 10 years. And I think that's really cool, because many of these people, really find Christ. But so going to church is, people's, When we have meetings and we want to invite our friends to our church and so on, that they ask the question, does it cost anything? Oh, can I really come? And things like that. They don't really understand that they are that they can come to the church. So it's sort of, they think that Christians are a secret club or a sect or something like that. I would say most think like that, or have more of a cultural understanding of church. So you go for a concert or for a funeral or something like that. So and I just adding to what someone else said, that I think the younger generation really haven't had any teaching around about Christ or the cross or anything, and they don't even seem to have the vocabulary. One American missionary who works here in Stockholm, he found out that it's easier to talk to young Swedish people in English than in Swedish, because they have a better vocabulary in English, because they pick it up from films and TV shows and things like that, where there's seems to be no conversation going on in their family or in school or anywhere where they talk in the native language.
I wonder if a couple of you could also speak to this idea about how the idea in Sweden that religion is private. You told an interesting story about that, Isak. I wonder if you could share that story with us.
Yeah, some years ago, I was sitting having coffee with a colleague at my old workplace, and I kind of started asking about her faith, and she kind of started blushing and like kind of got stiff. And I of course, being a Christian and oftentimes feeling comfortable talking about my faith, I was like, what did I do? What did I say? and then she said, well, this is very private, actually. Like, this is not something you just talk about with anyone. I can't remember her exact words, but I remember being like taken aback, and I was like, wow, I'm not used to this. And so I find it interesting. And it kind of adds, or fits together well with what you shared, Rickard, as well.
Would either of you like to add to that, Jonas or Rickard?
I can just agree on that it's you have to talk about faith with a Swede. You must cross cultural barriers, because it's so like, and that affects us as Christians, because we also are not used to talk about faith with people. Or it's like you. So I think it's a cultural barrier that makes it very difficult to evangelize, talk about faith. It's not natural. It's easier in like multicultural areas where people mix from different cultures, where you are more open to talk about faith, and faith is more natural. But if you live in a ethnic Swedish area, and it's quite difficult.
It's very interesting. So it's as if I hear you saying that it's a topic that's not that's private and just unspoken in many ways. Yeah. Would you say that means that Swedes are any less interested in God than other people?
I mean, one thought that I have is, I mean, in Sweden, it's so affluent, and we have everything we need, and our social security system network, whatever, is one of the best in the world, so kind of we don't need God for caring for our daily bread, so to speak. So, and then if you think of the psychologist Maslow and his needs hierarchy with the basics at the bottom and then kind of self-actualization at the top, in my mind, in the secular context, when there is such affluence and prosperity as well as Sweden, it's almost like self-actualization is like what we worship. so anything that goes against that is actually like idol worshiping from the secular point of view. That's my thought, my take on it. So I don't know what you guys say.
Well, I think the guys I play tennis with, I mean, they live for their work, they live for their families. They, if I ask them, they live happy lives. God is not present anywhere in their kind of reasoning and so on. So it's not near for people to start thinking about God. And if you look at Swedes, I would say that God seems to enter through the back door, where when there's a big need that surfaces, you get sick or you have mental problems or somebody dies in your family, then people start think about, okay, maybe there is a God, maybe I should pray, maybe I should start thinking about these things. And actually the last few weeks I've heard, now with COVID going on and things are, really closed down, people are starting to think more. So I've heard of a few new conversations in workplaces where people have started asking questions about the Bible and about faith and so on. And that seems to be a new thing. And also, then my church members are not ready for the conversation because nobody ever asked them any question at work before. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think that secularization also leads to an emptiness. So that I think there is a growing spiritual searching or longing that emerge in certain places, and so I think that there is a harvest that is reaped, and that people are also looking for God. Even in Sweden, they have this longing deep inside.
Well, why don't we kind of move on to that and give your thoughts on what you think God is up to in Sweden. What are some signs that that spring is coming? Spiritual spring might be erupting in Sweden.
From our point of view, OM, with our strategic focus on the least reached in society and in the country and in the world, something that's exciting is that it seems like more and more organizations and denominations put this on their agenda, like kind of finishing the task and going to those who've never heard it before, and the unreached, which is exciting and a blessing. An example is they just started a small YWAM base just an hour south of here in the forest. Not many unreached there, but their focus is on the unreached and the least reached. So that is an exciting thing, I think, from a global mission strategy point of view. But also, I think on a local level, in your local churches, who are the people who no one actually tries or can reach in your local community?
And actually, in that way, Sweden has been a sending country for years, sending missionaries all over the world, and still is sending a lot of missionaries. But now it seems like God is also sending the harvest to us with people from all over the world. And I actually heard I know a cool story, but I can't mention everything around it for security reasons. But there's a guy, now he received Christ in Sweden. He's from a tribal part of a country in Asia, and he's now reaching out to his tribe over internet. So he's evangelizing and he's making disciples, and people seem to come to Christ, through his ministry every week, from a remote place in the north of Sweden. and that's pretty cool, actually. So and I know that similar things are going on in many places right now. So it's even in a time when COVID has put a lid on many things, God is still working through people and churches here.
Jonas?
Yeah, I think that the spring is coming, Actually, we have been talking of this for some years now, that we see the signs of spring. And the numbers of members in free churches and numbers of churches have been decreasing for a very long time. But now the free church denominations and some mission organizations have agreed and set a common goal that by 2025 we will plant more churches, that we will plant more new churches in Sweden than we close down. And we are quite far from that right now. So it's an ambitious goal, but we think that it is possible, and the number of new churches planted has been increasing during the last 20 years. So we think God is on the move for mission in Sweden.
That gives hope, and I also can, see that the young generation, teenagers and young adults in the churches are more. They want to share their faith in a different way than my generation. We grew up in church and we wanted to revolt and play rock music in church and so on. And these kids, they want to go out and do something for their friends. So I find that pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, we talk about the least reached and the unreached quite a bit. And we know that Jesus told his people to make disciples of all nations. When you look at Sweden, who would you consider the least reached or the unreached in Sweden?
Well, I would say if you can look at unreached people groups in different ways, but if you look at the Swedish population, I would say that teenagers, young adults is a group that we need to target, because very few of them are what I would say born again believers without Christ, and we can really see mental health issues are spreading rapidly in that group, some drug abuse and things like that too. So it is a group of people that is really unreached. At the same time, when I look at Stockholm, when I look at the numbers, we have people from every country of the world except one, I think, living, and it's a remote, Pacific Ocean country that is not represented. So there are people from all countries, all nations. There are also people from unreached tribes that live among us. The problem is that they're a little bit hard to spot, because all these people merge and mix in the city. So, but there are areas that we really need to target, and I know some churches are really doing good work to reach out to some groups.
I think I just agree with Richard. I would say there are many immigrants from Muslim countries that is very difficult to reach in their home countries, but have come here, and we see moves of God among these people. And I think that's one of the groups that we need to target. But I would also say ethnic Swedes that are grown up in a post-Christian and secular society with very little or no knowledge at all of the gospel and Christian faith. If you discuss with young adults about faith, you will be surprised really about how little they know about the gospel. So I think we must talk about ethnic Swedes as unreached, or among the least reached also.
And from a maybe a national point of view, there a few years ago, a report came out that kind of painted the picture of where there are vibrant communities of Jesus followers, so to speak, and there are geographical locations around the country where there's very few actually established fellowships of Jesus followers, communities of Jesus followers.
Just to give an example, when I moved to Stockholm from Luleå, and there's a technical university there, and few years ago, there was a evangelical Christian group, but they had to close down because they could only they were closing down because they could only find 3 believers in this university of about 8,000 students. But we encouraged them to continue and have them to form an alpha course and so on. So I mean, they were able to do some work. But those numbers just say something about how the situation is.
Well, this has been very useful, and I'd like to just go on for another couple hours and hear your wisdom and your thoughts on what's happening in Sweden. But maybe since our time is running out, maybe you could just help us to know how to pray for Sweden. And I just ask each of you to give 1 or 2 prayer requests before we wrap up our discussion.
Well, I can just continue on my track with young adults and students. We need to pray for workers for the harvest, and both nationals, but we would need missionaries also coming to Sweden to reach out to students in university areas. So that's a big prayer request.
Thank you, Rikard.
I have also written a prayer request on my paper here, and I wrote workers for the harvest. So it's the same thing, and that's my struggle as a church planting coordinator. We have many places where we would like that we are praying for, areas that we are praying for, where we would like to send workers. We also have some resources to support workers, but there is a lack of workers, and that's been the situation since I started this work. And I think that there are 2 different sides of this. The first is that to pray for young people in Sweden, or Swedish Christians in general, to be willing to make sacrifices for the gospel and the kingdom of God, because I think that we have a lack of willingness to sacrifice and to give up our comfort and lifestyle for the sake of the gospel, because mission and church planting will always involve sacrifice. Without sacrifice, there will be no fruit. And I think we need to pray for a willingness to sacrifice for the gospel, and also for workers from other countries, and that people that come here from other countries to work in Sweden, that they will do so in collaboration with Swedish churches and Swedish denominations and Swedish networks, because sometimes we can see that people come here with a calling or ambition and vision to work in Sweden, but if they don't connect with the Swedish culture or Swedish networks of churches, they will not always, but very often remain very small groups that don't really impact the Swedish society very much. So, but pray for workers, both from Sweden and from other countries.
And my prayer request would be connected to what you were saying, Jonas, about sacrifice, and the prayer would be that we don't worship stability and security and keeping peace with secular society, but that we would be faithful to the gospel, to our Lord, to the mission that Jesus gave us, so thereby being willing to sacrifice.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think many of our audience will be praying for Sweden, and perhaps they'll reach out and get in contact with you. But thank you very much for this time, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Contact information for the people in the discussion will be at the end of the video. The Plant Network is a community of people stretching from Portugal in the east to the Ural Mountains in the west, who are longing to see thousands of new vibrant communities of Jesus followers be birthed wherever people live, work, play, and learn. We think that every church should be a vibrant community of Jesus followers, but not every vibrant community of Jesus followers is necessarily a church. If you'd like to hear more about this, please write us. We'd love to be in dialogue with you. Thank you.